Hello, everybody, and welcome to Grand Prix Surveillance. We're super excited today as we launch our pilot episode for season number one of GPS as we gear up for another exciting year of racing. For those of you new to the channel and the podcast, my name is Saidat, and I'm joined by my co host Aditya Chaco Abraham. Chaco, it's been quite a short off season. Given the fact that we finished the season quite late into December last year relative to other seasons. How's your off season been treating you?
Well, hello and welcome, viewers and listeners. Off season, man, it hasn't been that much of a change, to be honest. Considering that the last race was in December, we really didn't have to wait that long to possibly even see the next cars or to even expect what we're going to get from 2021. But as you mentioned, 2020 was quite the year, considering the COVID-19 outbreak and with so much of uncertainty happening around F1 and all sorts of motorsport. It was just so good to see F1 back on track, but I also think that it has also kept us a little more in check to expect what we can get from Formula One in 2021 too. I don't think there are a lot of changes which we can talk about, but there are a few changes which actually do change the dynamic of the F1 paddock, and I am really looking forward to it.
For sure, definitely. Despite there being only a few major changes, especially in terms of driver swap, one thing I think we can all agree on was last season was definitely one of the, if not the most memorable season in the recent years. Perhaps might not have had the best racing of all, but it was definitely one that you remember, especially seeing 17 races squeezed into that tight space of roughly 6 to 7 months. However, I think one of the main highlights was we've had two new race winners last year, with the likes of Sergio Perez and Pierre Gasly. When we go back to Monza, where it all started, where the real action began.
Yeah, absolutely, Sadat. And the one thing I like about Formula One so much is not just the part about cars racing or the close action or stuff like that. It is about the kind of uncertainty you have on the racetrack because you can never say never. Anyone at the right place at the right time could possibly bag podiums or could possibly win. And you could see that very likely with the case of Pierre Gasly and Monza. Right here, right now, given a team like Mercedes, you don't expect them to have a pit stop fumble like that. You don't expect a race engineer like Peter Bonington to give information to Lewis to get into a pit lane, which is at red right now. And I think, given the circumstances, then nobody would have expected even Gasly to win. I think five laps before the checkered flag, you would have expected Stroll to win, but it just proves to the F1 community or the racing world that it's not just about being in the fastest car, but also trying to utilize every last inch of performance which you can get from the ride under you. And I think that is what
Yep.
many drivers have shown this year. If it's not just Gasly, Perez has done that quite consistently. Stroll has done that a lot. Charlie Leclerc has done that in a Ferrari, which hasn't perhaps performed to the best of its capabilities. What do you think about that?
Oh yeah, definitely. Charles Leclerc's podium way back in the beginning of the season. Again, one classic example of a freak podium that just comes out of nowhere, where you play your cards right, you're at the right place at the right time. I remember back in Austria, he managed to get that Ferrari, which, let's be honest, was really not a podium contender for this year. Let alone even being able to get on the top step of the podium, barely making it to third place was difficult in that car. We've seen this happen in multiple instances. However, I think one podium sitter back in the beginning was Lando Norris, who pulled off a stunning multi-position pass on those last few laps in the Austrian GP. Um, so yeah, we've definitely seen first-time podium sitters this year that have really got a good opportunity to show their skills, not just because of the bad luck of other drivers, but because of their own presence of mind on track. Um, Apart from that, we also, like you had said, the standout performance from Sergio Perez, due to there was the bad luck that George Russell faced. Despite having one of the most powerful cars on the grid, he did have an issue with his pit stop, courtesy of some mismanagement or miscommunication that happened in the pits. That potentially cost George Russell his first ever podium and victory. However, the positive side is at least he got his first points of the season.
Oh man, that race in Sakir had quite a bit to talk about. And, Perez has always been the man who everyone would call reliable and consistent. And to
Yep.
actually put into perspective what happened at the start of the race and throughout the end of the race, I don't think anybody would have come out with a circumstance where they would have seen Sergio Perez win. At turn number 4, he was spun around by a crash of two other drivers, and
Mhm.
he was chucked back to the back of the grid. And I know there have been multiple safety cars, there have been lots of incidents during the race, but this is the thing when it's not just you working at the top of your game, but how you work collectively as a team. It's about the kinds of information you relay to your race engineers, what sort of strategy choices you make. And I think Racing Point were
Yep.
bang on the buck here. They did a fantastic job. They made the best choices. They put the right tires on. They were on the right strategy. And what do you know? 5 laps before the race, you have Sergio Perez who is actually leading before the checkered flag. And I think that was brilliant to watch because this was it. This was the moment everyone wanted to see. He's been in the
Yep.
sport since 2012 and
Yep.
he still hadn't won a race. I think the last time anyone would want someone to win a race so badly was Nico Hulkenberg. That didn't happen.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
everyone's saying Perez win was a real game changer for, I think, the entire F1 community. Everyone was
Yeah.
happy to see him win. It was more like a wholesome scene altogether.
Yeah, I think going from plum last, Perez from plum last propelling all the way to the top definitely was a highlight. I think one of the most cherished memories of last year. The great part about that Shakir podium was we had quite a few Force India boys up there. Of course, Perez, Lance Stroll was there, his teammate, and former Force India driver Esteban Ocon also got his first podium. So it was great to see, first time podium sitters like Albon, Ocon, Lando as well getting all of their podiums this year. So as much as there was a lot of good that happened this year, there was one quite terrifying incident that happened towards the end of last year. That being Romain Grosjean's horrific crash in Bahrain that saw him finish his last race in Haas, literally in two pieces. At least his car in that point of view. Can you like run us through what exactly happened at the beginning of that race and what the repercussions were later on?
I think, well, everybody knows exactly how bad the crash was. And to see Romain Grosjean walk out of that crash, that fiery crash, I think was the best moment of pretty much the entire season. Because when you see things like this, it just puts into perspective how dangerous the sport really is. People take for granted that it's just people going around in circles, but people literally put their lives at risk before they drive that car, before the lights go out. And
Right.
I think it is quite a fantastic job what the F1 management has done, the FI has done to ensure that the cars are a lot more safer. The drivers can go in and come out without the risk of losing a limb or losing a life. And it's only proved to the driver's benefit considering that we've had only a few fatalities after 1994. We did have the one of Anton Hubert who passed away last year in 2019 in Spa,
Yep.
but these are changes which have been made subsequently to ensure that the drivers are being safe. But I think this really puts into perspective how dangerous the sport is, and you can't take these things for granted. While these guys are here to win world championships, they're putting a lot at risk.
Yeah.
And the F1 community, the F1 management, and everyone agrees right now that I think the Halo did save Grosjean's life.
For sure. I think the Halo is proved to be a necessity in multiple accidents this year. Uh, and in the recent years, of course, we had a horrific crash in Spa a few years ago, where I believe it was Fernando Alonso's car that almost, I mean, just about grazed over the top of Charles Leclerc's Sauber at that time, or Alfa Romeo back then. So yeah, of course, the Halo has been a very, very good device that's saved potentially multiple lives just the recent years. So yeah, there's been a lot of ups and downs this year. But I think one thing that this year will be known for is, it is the year where history starts of being remade. Lewis Hamilton got his seventh world title, finally achieving what Michael Schumacher did many years ago. So yeah, you win some, you lose some. I think that's the serendipity of motorsport. You just have to be there at the right place at the right time, play your cards right. And it was great to see that rain hit race in Istanbul being the title decider for this year. An extremely chaotic race as it is. It was great to see Sebastian Vettel. finish off that podium, finally getting his first podium of the year. And to see 11 world titles shared between Lewis Hamilton and Vettel on that podium really, I think, serves as inspiration on its own for many youngsters who want to get into the sport. Anyhow, speaking of Vettel, this man has caused a huge domino effect in the driver lineup. Well, not entirely his fault, of course, his impending departure from Ferrari, which was decided back in the beginning of last year's season, created this domino effect and put silly season into what you could only say was one of the most turbulent turmoils of recent times. Let's start all the way from the beginning. What exactly happened back then?
Well, Sadat, you have just rightly mentioned that the crescendo effect that Vettel had caused had actually restructured, well, pretty much the entire grid in Formula One. And I think this is pretty much the most important thing to look forward to, considering what changes we can really expect from Formula One. So we heard the
Yep,
bombshell news that Ferrari isn't going to retain Sebastian Vettel or give him a contract extension for another year. So
yep,
naturally, we knew that the only person who could possibly go up into that position would have been Carlos Sainz or Daniel Ricciardo.
mm,
But knowing the fact where Ricciardo is in his career, I don't think it would have been right for him to go to Ferrari because he really wants to win world championships. And I don't think he would be in a place to actually win a world championship sitting in a number two car for Ferrari because they have put their money, they've put their time, they've invested everything they have in Charles
yep,
Leclerc.
yep,
And naturally speaking, I think Carlos Sainz would have taken that gig any given day, considering he's moved out quite a lot and he wants some stability right now. And I think
yep,
he's in a good place to take things forward. And I think Carlos Sainz is in a good place to ensure that the team is going to get some points. I know Ferrari have had a rough year, but they have a very good lineup. The two very good drivers. I
mm,
think
yep,
another point which we can talk about is that how reliable Carlos is at most points.
yep,
So
yep,
I think it's a good move. Uh, we also have Daniel Ricciardo, who has moved from the now Alpine team to McLaren. Uh,
correct.
McLaren is very strong. I,
Yep,
I, I, I personally believe that this is pretty much one of the strongest teams in F1. Considering the kinds of performance we've seen from Lando last year, I
mm,
think the team is very stable and they can look forward to very bright futures, considering that they also have a major upgrade, which we will talk about in the next segment. Uh,
yep.
a one certain Fernando Alonso is returning back to Formula One. What do you
Oh
think
yeah.
about that,
Oh
Saida?
yeah. Yeah, I think that that was perhaps one of the most eye-catching moves of last year. Now, there are two sides to this coin. Not many people are sure what exactly is going to happen. How much he's actually going to be able to extract out of that Renault, or now we'd call it the Alpine. But what we've seen is Fernando has driven for McLaren in the past, and when he went back to McLaren in the beginning of this turbo hybrid era, his stint wasn't exactly that rewarding. He wasn't able to reap the rewards of that car. Let's just hope that Alonso's come back to his old team. Renault is gonna prove to be a much better experience this time around. I know every single fanboy and fangirl out there who's been following the sport and who's a big fan of Fernando Alonso really wants to see him back on the top. So I guess all I can say is let's just wait and see what happens. We're really not sure how Fernando is going to adapt to these relatively new Pirelli compounds. They have been here for a few years, but I don't think he's been able to test Pirelli compounds that were initially initiated back in 2019. Let's see how that goes. So obviously a very experienced driver coming into the grid, but on the flip side, let's look at Haas. They have a completely new driver lineup this time. They've finally let go of Romain Grosjean, Kevin Magnussen, who have been there for many years with Haas, who have really helped develop that team. I think Haas is where they are today because of the hard efforts of those two drivers. Right now, they have Nikita Mazepin and Mick Schumacher, two rookies from the Formula 2 scene from back from last year, who are finishing off this grid. How do you think that dynamic is going to work in terms of Haas's development?
For sure, for sure. I agree that Haas has come a long way only because of the kinds of development that Romain Grosjean and Kevin Magnussen have put through the team. But I also feel that Formula One is a sport that must encourage young drivers to join the sport as well, because that is the direction the sport is heading as well. Uh, you can see the way how Mick Schumacher has improved through his entire junior racing series.
Yep.
His career has been quite the up move. And I think the man brings a lot of insight towards the team. I think Nikita Mazepin also brings a lot of insight to how the cars can be developed. They still have Pietro Fittipaldi, who has been the reserve driver for the past few years. I think he has done a lot of development on the car, which can basically still help the team out. He also did race for Haas in the last two races, so that also gives them a better idea. But yeah, Haas have been in the news quite a bit, but I think that this is a fresh start for them. Also,
For sure.
considering the fact that all their developments right now are mostly around the technical aspect, excluding the engine, which they hope that the Ferrari will bring back to its original glory. But I think this is a new start, and I think for Haas are genuinely looking forward to 2022 rather than 2021. They have a good driver lineup, they have a good team, they've got the money, and they just need to see how they can do well on track. Coming
Yep.
on to
Yep.
the next Coming on to the next barrack where we can find the stables of Red Bull. Red Bull have gone through a major upshift, Sada. So
Yep.
while they have a huge array of young drivers who they could just possibly put into either of the four cars which they have,
Hmm.
this year turned out to be quite, quite the regular as for Red Bull. Alex Albon has been dropped by Red Bull Racing.
Yep.
While the entire year we've heard that he wouldn't be dropped, it was the same story as what they did to Pierre Gasly. And I get a lot of people would be like, he hasn't performed at the top of his game. His performances may not have been the best as how they were last year. But
Yep.
that second seat at Red Bull is always an imminent threat. And
Exactly.
I
I think.
think the
Yep.
person who is always going to be getting that car or getting that number to drive is always going to be someone who's reliable and who
Yep.
can listen to the team and just bag points and bag a win at any point in time. We don't have Danny Kvyat, who is going to be running in with Pierre Gasly, who will be the team lead now. We have Yuki Tsunoda, who has come up from a flurry of wonderful performances at the back end of the Formula 2 season last year. I think Yuki Tsunoda's coming to fame right now is pretty much one of the best things Formula One could see right now. He's so young, he's got lots of talent, and he's got Honda backing him. And
Yep.
I think it just leaves a new precedent for the way Formula One is shaping for the future. And we can only expect to see what's yet to come. But I think the biggest change out of all of this, from all of what happened in 2020, was the fact that one, Mr. Checo Perez is now racing with Red Bull. Something that nobody could have expected throughout the entirety of last season had happened. Checo Perez is actually racing for Red Bull.
Yep.
And given the circumstances right now with the entire F1 grid, everybody wanted Perez to stay in Formula One considering how good he was. And I think it paid him dividends considering he showed such sublime performances throughout the season. And I think the best one was Sakir, where he won. Why don't you take it up from your side?
For sure. I think Perez has been in the sport since I believe 2011 when he started when he made his debut with Sauber on the grid. Yeah, he's been waiting a long time for this win. He's got a lot of good podiums and in the process, but he was really waiting out for this win. And I think that was one of the instances from last year that really sealed his deal with Red Bull. Of course, there are images and discussions of pictures of him having discussions with Helmut Marko and Christian Horner and various points in the Abu Dhabi paddock. But nothing really came to light until after the race actually ended. Now, as for why they went with Perez, why they went with the more experienced driver, of course, I think they've started realizing that they need someone who can really match Max's pace, at least from an experience point of view. We saw this experienced driver youngster pairing work really well when Sebastian Vettel and Mark Webber were there. Of course, the dynamics of the team were a little hazy, but of course, I think both those drivers really did deliver multiple wins and podiums that sealed the constructors championship. Right now, I think Red Bull wants the constructors championship and then move on to try to get that drivers championship. Um, but at the moment, yeah, Mr. Perez is Mr. Consistent. He has got a lot of podiums. He's been there at the right point, the right time. Baku 2018, you have Russia, you have Malaysia 2012. Definitely, it's going to be an interesting battle to see the number three and the number 11 work as a team to get Red Bull back to where they were many years ago. Perhaps they are the only team right now with the potential to overthrow Mercedes in their dominant stride in this V6 turbo hybrid era. Speaking of Albon, he is, of course, going to DTM, so he's not completely out of the scene. He is a Red Bull reserve driver right now, and he will also be driving for Alpha Tauri in the Ferrari GT3 car in the DTM season this year. We'll talk a little bit about DTM later on in this episode. Yeah, so of course, a lot of driver changes have happened on the grid this year, but there are drivers that are still remaining back in their old teams. When do you take it from here, Chaco? What are the drivers that are still sticking around with their old contracts?
Yeah, so Mercedes is staying with their old drivers. They're staying with Lewis and Valtteri Bottas, who I think they're happy with, considering that they have given them world championships and constructor championships. That dynamic doesn't really have to change. Uh, the new rebranded Alpine F1 team is going to have Ocon, who is staying on with them. Pierre Gasly is going to be taking over as team lead at Alpha Tauri. Williams is staying with Nicholas Latifi and George Russell. Alfa Romeo don't really need another change, considering they have two extremely good drivers, Kimi Raikkonen and Italian Jesus Antonio Giovinazzi.
Yep.
Lando Norris is staying with his childhood team of McLaren, and Lance Stroll is still staying with Daddy.
Yeah.
What do you think has happened to the rest of the grid?
Yeah, I think the
Yeah,
rest of the grid has obviously gone through that silly season, but these drivers that you just mentioned, of course, all of them have done really well with their own teams. I think the Williams dynamic is really good. Latifi and Russell both are getting up to speed with F1. Alfa Romeo, Kimi Raikkonen and Antonio, they're good pals back from Ferrari days. They work really well, and I think they've done a solid job last year. Lance Stroll, yeah, of course, one argument could be that he's still, he is racing because of his dad's money, but we have to appreciate what he's done last year. We know he's been going through he's been going through a steep upward battle mentally, and we've seen that in multiple news stories last year. He got COVID as well, but I think in my guess of all the people who have done a really good job last year, I would say Lance Stroll was definitely a highlight for me. The way he was able to take that racing point around and also keep up to speed with Perez for the most bit. But yeah, I think all in all, we have a really exciting driver lineup for next year. Some drivers who we wish would still be there, some who we're happy to see again come back. Only time can tell, Chaco. But those are obviously the drivers. A lot of things have changed in drivers, but quite a few changes in terms of team names and team structures as well, right? Can you take it from here? What's the first thing that's changed this year?
well, there have been quite a few massive changes with a few teams. I think one of the biggest ones we have seen right now is the rebranding of Racing Point to Aston Martin.
Mhm.
While I think that it is absolutely brilliant to see the Aston Martin badge come back to Formula One, I all in all think that there is an aura around which that the team still keeps a large portion of what it was from, let's say, Force India to Racing Point to what it is right now, which is Aston Martin. There is one huge change which they have to the team, wherein which right now they're getting a four-time world champion to join them, Sebastian Vettel. And I think vast amounts of knowledge which the man carries, but
Mhm.
can actually win them a lot more races, considering that they are just off a brilliant season which they've had last year. And
Yep.
it's not just that. Sebastian Vettel also works very well with engineers.
Right.
He's a guy
Yep.
who understands the car like nobody else. And I think the only other person who's understood a car so well is a Jensen Button.
Yep.
So I think having someone like Sebastian Vettel joining the team is going to pay them dividends very quickly. And I think Sebastian Vettel right now is here to prove a point, not just to the F1 community, but also to set things right on his own. He had been ridiculed for the past few years, being this banana that he was,
Yeah.
but right now, I think he's on a path of his own. He has something to prove,
Yep.
and I think he's just on his own way to do it. And irrespective of what people say, he's got some new set of rules which he wants to set out for with Aston Martin. And he has an extremely good teammate in the form of Lance Stroll, who has proved time and time over again through 2020 and 2019 that he deserves to be on the F1 grid. A lot of
Absolutely.
people may argue that he might not be world champion material, but I think that the man deserves a drive. And I think that compared to a lot of other junior drivers who genuinely put a lot of money to come into the sport just to drive, this man has shown some good resilience. So I think Aston Martin's in a very good place right
For sure.
I'm happy.
Speaking of really good drivers who also work as good engineers, of course, we have great world champions in the recent years like Sebastian Vettel, Nico Rosberg, one of the drivers who really excelled in Williams engineering tests long back, and Jenson Button, of course. These are drivers that really understand the car inside out. That's what a world champion brings to a team, and that's what we see now in Alpine racing, formerly Renault Sport. We see Alonso coming back to his old team in the form of Alpine Racing. And what's really cool is that in their management structure, they do have Pat Fry again taking care of technical things in the team. Pat Fry and Fernando Alonso have worked really well back in Ferrari between 2010 and 2014. So in terms of a team dynamic, I think both of these individuals bring a good let's say driver engineer partnership into the whole dynamic. How do you think this ties in with another big name from MotoGP that's coming into Alpine?
So yeah, absolutely. So that Alpine Racing F1. Wow, it's good to see the Alpine name back in F1. And I think this is also because Renault had been hinting at a lot of restructuring that was quite imminent.
Yep.
Luca De Meo had just been appointed the CEO last year, and he had been hinting that he wanted to reinvigorate the racing brand which Renault has, and that is Alpine. Alpine also has plans to bring out road cars, and I think the plan to involve F1 directly in the road car program is it's quite nice. A lot of teams have done that in the past. McLaren still do it. Mercedes do it. Ferrari does it. I think it's a good place for Alpine to start. But considering the major changes which have impacted the structure of the team, is that we don't have Cyril Abiteboul anymore. We have
Right.
Laurent Rossi, who is coming in as CEO. We don't know who the team principal is yet, but he will be taking care of racing operations for Alpine Racing F1. We also have Davide Brivio, who is
Yep.
coming in from Suzuki at MotoGP, coming off the back of what was a brilliant season. Considering what Davide Brivio had done in MotoGP, bringing a new team like Suzuki, who had just joined the sport like in 2012 or 2013, to win the World Championship last year, Constructors and Drivers Championship, talks so much about the kind of resilience and the kinds of knowledge the man can bring into the sport. Davide Brivio and Fernando Alonso right now are in a very good place to actually lead Alpine in a good way. I don't
Yep.
know about the kinds of expectations we can have from a pairing like this. Well, the team is pretty much still the Enstone based team, but the leadership qualities that a lot of these guys bring is quite exceptional. And I think we can definitely keep an eye for them. Yeah, and I
Sure.
often felt that people obviously had a say in saying that why do we need Fernando back on the grid? Why do we need these old drivers? F1 is about the future. Alpine have so many young drivers in their program. They have a Formula 3 world champion, which is Oscar Piastri. They have Christian Lundgaard. They have Guan Yu
Yep.
Zhou. They've had Max Utrell, Caio Collet, Vettel Martin. A lot of good drivers, but I think right here, right now, in the current situation, they need leadership, and Fernando Alonso brings a lot of that back to the grid and to the team.
For sure. Yep.
That seems cool. That seems quite fruitful for the
Yeah.
future.
Speaking of leadership, it was really sad to hear another piece of news last year when we officially heard that a Williams family member will no longer be in charge or will no longer be running the Williams F1 team. Of course, Claire Williams and Frank Williams pulling out of the sport right around, I think, Monza. Monza was their last race with the team. So now, of course, no Williams family member is in the team. How do you think this is going to play into what's going to happen to Williams in the next few years, given that a lot of rule changes are coming up next year?
Oh, before we move into all the rule changes and how things actually plan out,
Yeah,
I think it is I think it is very important to mention about how F1 really got its name. And I don't think F1 was just built because of a couple of manufacturers like a Ferrari, an Alfa Romeo, or a Mercedes decided to bring a couple of cars and race throughout decades. I think there were people like Bruce McLaren, Frank Williams,
yep,
Colin Chapman,
yep, yep,
Jack Brabham, all these guys, they have literally built teams, built cars from the ground up. These guys have given a new vision to a lot of people who have just come into the sport. And I think Formula One have sustained because of the hard work and perseverance from a lot of these individual family held teams. And
Yeah.
last year we had witnessed the loss of what is now the last running family member team. So Claire Williams will not be the team principal anymore.
Yeah.
And Formula One is cutthroat. If you don't have the money, there's no place to go forward. And I think the best way to take things forward is considering that Darlington Capital is taking over from Williams. But the most important part to notice is that we still have two Williams on the grid. So it is not as bad as it could be.
Yeah.
But I think this also gives you the leeway and the financial availability to do whatever you want. You can restructure the team, you can put money through various departments, you can have the inflow and outflow of money to wherever you want it. You can have a little more flexibility on the kinds of development you want, and you just don't have to worry about when you would go broke. And I think
Yeah.
Darlington Capital has done just that, and it's just going to get better for Williams. We also have Jos Capito, who's moving into the team, who surmounts vast amounts of knowledge from teams like McLaren, and also who headed Volkswagen Motorsport International. He is pretty much the reason why Sebastian Ogier won so many world titles with Volkswagen, and I think it's good to have people like that back onto the grid. And this only ensures that we can have the Williams racing team and the Williams engineering department run as single entities so that they don't have to worry about what is yet to come in the future. They can have their own programs and they can just focus on doing one thing at a time. And I think that is the most important thing right now. Speaking of engineering, I think the most prominent changes what we can notice in 2021 are the minor changes which we have from 2020. And I think in an ideal world, we pretty much wouldn't be in this situation. We wouldn't have COVID. We would have had 23 races last year.
Yep.
We also would have had new cars racing this year, which were widely spoken about, which are supposed to be ensuring that the racing gets a lot more interesting and a lot more exciting. But we only land up with a few changes considering about the kind of budget crunches and the way teams are suffering right now due to the COVID outburst. So
Right.
right now we have changes to the floors of the cars. We have the diffuser fences which are cut, and we have a cost cap which was introduced. Well, not the real one which was supposed to be introduced in 2022, but we have a 175 million cap, which technically gives a lot of teams in the middle of the pack
Yep.
a level ground to start playing with. So, how do you think
Yep.
these changes are really going to affect the dynamic of the racing in 2022 or 2021?
Well, let's start back from the top in terms of the technical changes that have happened this year. So the main change, of course, is our main intent of all these rule changes is to slightly reduce the downforce levels of these cars. Now, of course, this will affect racing maybe negatively because the lap times might become slightly worse for wear, but I think the reason why they've put it is more important. So let's try to understand why these reductions in downforce levels are paramount to the success of this season. So Pirelli, of course, we've been running, or F1 has been running 13-inch rims, and one of the major changes for 2021 was for F1 to shift to 18-inch rims. Potentially have a little bit more downforce, have a bit more grip for these cars. Um, However, because of last year's offset and delay in the start of the season, teams had nowhere near enough time or money or the workforce for that matter to prepare these cars for 2021, which is why these major changes have been shifted to 2022. Now, how does this play into the tire performance? Well, Pirelli planned to use certain tires for 2019 and 2020 with the intention that they only undergo these 2 years of aero development. Now, they're not designed to go undergo a third year of aerodynamic development. So, with these current Pirelli tires on 13-inch rims, if teams were to go with higher downforce levels this year, things would have gotten ugly pretty fast. We already saw, massive tire failures, some really scary tire failures last year. Daniel Kvyat through Maggots and Beckett's high energy corners in Silverstone. We saw Lewis Hamilton somehow miraculously go over the line with just a couple of tires on his car. We saw a devastating crash for Lance Stroll as well back in the Tuscan GP at Jello because of a tire failure. So these have been recurring instances, and if you see the pattern, they're all happening at high energy corners. Now, what exactly do we need to do to prevent this? Of course, reduce aerodynamic downforce. So now, generally, these cars run small slots, vortex generators, release slots towards the edges of their underbody. And this basically increases the downforce by sealing that air along the sides of these underbodies, sort of like a sliding skirt that we've seen in ground effect cars back in the Lotus days in the 80s and 70s. Anyhow, these have now been banned. So now these floors have to be completely flat. And as a result, overall downforce from the underbody is reduced. And also, like you said, the diffuser fences have been reduced. They've been cut short. And what this means is you're going to have less diffuser performance, and more subtly, but importantly, in my opinion, you're going to have a little bit more dirty air because of the turbulence of that air being released by a shorter diffuser. So in terms of racing, I think this is going to have some problems in terms of slipstreaming. What do you think?
Well, for sure, Saidat. And you've seen that a lot of problems which have been caused since the turbo hybrid era was the vast diaspora of the development which the cars have had, namely Mercedes, Ferrari, Renault,
Yep.
and let's say Honda as well. But I think the biggest idea to get the rules changed in 2021, which is now 2022, was that we'll have to increase the kinds of exciting racing which it actually produces. Uh,
Yep.
Through 2014 to 2020, we have seen the most drastic change of car development which we have seen through any decade. And these cars have become more faster and they have become so much more technologically advanced, which just makes it so much more harder for cars behind to follow. And I think it
Yep.
is so much more valuable to even note that the a Red Bull or a Mercedes who would often be leading a race, if they're behind a Ferrari or if they're behind one another, find it extremely hard to overtake considering this the dirty air which is left in the wake in the other car to actually go forward and get. So I think 2021 is just going to be a year where we can just wait and see how things go organically.
Yep.
But all in
Yep.
all, I think a lot of teams are really looking forward to 2022 because that's another level playing field. We're going to get a 2014 all over again, or we're going to get a 2012 all over again. So I'm quite excited to see the changes which we have.
Yeah, yeah. Fingers crossed for a 2012 all over again. That would perhaps one of the most exciting seasons of the past few decades. But before going off topic, another technical change this year, which is not really a change on the cars, but in the calendar, is that we are not going testing in Montmeló in the Circuit de Catalunya this year. So generally every year we do a test at Catalonia, but this year we're directly going to Bahrain. Now it's not necessarily going to be a nighttime test throughout. I think they might be running some of the tests in the middle of the day. We'll need to check. However, Bahrain is a completely different circuit from Barcelona. The reason why teams go for testing in Barcelona, apart from just the availability of the track in the winter, is the fact that Barcelona is a well-rounded, well-balanced track. Generally, you can run a good 50-50 balance aero, 50-50 aero balance and mechanical balance at this track. A good selection of corners, long straights, chicanes, technical sections, high speed, a long high speed right hander. But Bahrain is completely different. Sure, you have some high speed, high downforce, high energy corners in the likes of turns number 5, 6, and 7. There's really nothing else that's really similar between these two circuits. So I don't think personally Bahrain is going to be the best benchmark for the downforce that these cars are going to bring. So I'm not really sure how much testing at Bahrain is going to help cars, apart from maybe getting those engines fired up and getting some preliminary setups ready for low downforce tracks. So I think all of this is going to play into a very exciting and perhaps very chaotic start to the season. Right after Bahrain, you have Imola this year. That's also a pretty technical track. Maybe not too much in terms of downforce, but it has a lot of technical sections. Another mechanical balance based track. So a lot to look out for in terms of technical aspects in this year. Not so much in car performance, but definitely in terms of car development over the year, given the cost gaps. What do you say about that, Jaco? Take it from here. What else can we expect?
I just want to touch up on that one point which you had mentioned before that we are not racing in Montmello this year. I'm sorry, we're not testing in Montmello this year, but
Yep.
we are doing it in Bahrain. So, looking at this holistically, we find Bahrain and Barcelona on polar opposite ends of the spectrum. The kinds of data you can get from one track is not going to represent the kinds of data you would get from let's say Bahrain right now.
For
And
sure.
also
Yeah.
another big change which is going to happen in F1 testing this year is that we are not running a 4-day testing weekend. We are doing a 3-day test. And this
Yep.
basically reduces the time which drivers can spend in the car, reduces the time where engineers can find for setups, can validate their aero, validate their dynamics, basically
Yep.
the entire car. And
Right.
this just basically makes it so much more harder for teams to actually bring a well-rounded car to the first race. However, we are racing in Bahrain the first race, so I think a lot of these teams might get some information which they could use, but I think things might get tricky when they get onto the European side of things.
For sure.
But
Yeah.
one major thing which I've noticed in testing through all these years was the fact that sometimes when they test at Barcelona, they usually test during winter and you have track temperatures of 9, 10,
Yep. Yep.
11 degrees Celsius, and then you go back in May, you raise the track temperatures of what 30 degrees Celsius, 40 degrees Celsius. Teams notice that the tire degradation is so much more. The cars
Right.
perform at not the same level as how it was doing in at testing. And right now we have the same thing in Bahrain, which we probably might be doing in the hot sun. And you have a race which is under lights. So you're obviously going to have a diaspora of information that can be validated by the engineers and the teams. But as they say again, never say never. Formula One, what makes it so much more exciting is the variables included and the kind of uncertainty it brings.
For
Uh,
sure.
I think when you move on to the next part of things, which I think a lot of fans would be very eager to notice about are the car reveals. Frankly
Yep.
speaking, there isn't much to see in these cars. I think apart from a bit of a livery change and a bit of changes at the back of the car, at the floor, I think a lot of teams have kept the same basic structure of the car the same, excluding, let's say, Ferrari, Haas, and Alfa Romeo. A
Yep.
lot of teams have tried to improve in the areas where they think they can gain time right now, considering this is the last year of development which they could do on the chassis.
Correct.
Uh,
Yep.
I think the most prominent change what we've noticed from this year is that McLaren will not be housing the Renault power unit anymore. They will be moving over with Mercedes Benz. And
Right.
well, it's quite
Yeah.
exciting to see what's going to happen in 2021. Well, right now, nobody can have any expectations of how well the car is going to do. They have a reliable power unit, but you must see how well it hitches along to the car.
Yep.
I think you can see how well Honda is doing right now with the amount of leeway they had to work with Red Bull. And if McLaren just hit the right spot with Mercedes, I think this is going to be a partnership that we can look out for. As how it's always been in the past few years, where they have won multiple world championships, this is just a new, uh, I think, era for even McLaren right now. They have a very good team, they have a very good driver, they have a
Yep.
very good top management. They're in a good place. I'm really looking forward to how McLaren is going to perform. What do you think about AlphaTauri?
AlphaTauri for sure they've come up with a slightly different, subtle change in their livery. Meant to be subtle, but I think it's completely changed the way the car looks. A lot of dark blue onto their cars. Of course, one thing with these dark blue cars like the AlphaTauri and Red Bull is because of their livery, very dark, solid colors and in the aero bits. It's sometimes difficult to say exactly what the teams have done. And if they paint it with multiple patterns, it becomes even more difficult. So we'll just have to wait and see in testing to see exactly how much has actually changed on these cars. We do know that Red Bull has added a lot of extra little winglets and turning vanes along the front part of their underbody before their official floorboard rule comes into play. Essentially channeling air and somehow making a sort of blown diffuser of sorts, just to kind of help in that lack of downforce due to the lack of diffuser fence length. Anyhow, let's see how it all goes. McLaren, of course, running the Mercedes unit this year. In terms of performance, I think that's going to play into their favor. The car itself looks very similar to last year. I think the shade of orange they've used is really nice. Nothing really much else to say about these cars. Aesthetically, they are what they are. They stick with their colors. But I think the most important thing to look at is what exactly these cars are going to deliver, and that can only be found out as time goes on. We have testing coming up in the next 2 weeks, so we'll have to wait and see, Chaco.
For sure, Sadat, for sure. I think only time will tell us what's left right now.
Yeah.
Uh, in the meanwhile, we also had Alfa Romeo who had released their car.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty much the same car, but Alfa Romeo and Haas, which we haven't seen as of now, have said that they are spending a lot of tokens on the development of some parts of the chassis, some
Yeah.
parts of the aero, the rear wing and the front wing, considering the fact that they have come out of what was quite an abysmal year
Mhm.
because of the lack of performance which is given by the Ferrari engine.
Yeah.
Frederick Vasseur says that there has been a lot of power which has been gained through various tests which Ferrari have done in the past
Right.
1 year of development on the same engine. Uh, Frederick Vasseur also says that the dyno test numbers are good, and along with the various changes which they have made to the cars, it should help them come back to, let's say, battling in the midfield, which I think they rightly should do. And
Yeah.
to have all of this come together, I think a lot of these teams must have a risk-free testing.
Right.
And if you don't have a risk-free testing, you're just going to end up in the same place last year with no data to quantify exactly what is doing, random car failures, zero reliability, and
Right.
just loss of performance at places where you don't want it to do. So
Yeah.
I think testing would be a real benchmark to see where things move on into 2021.
Mhm.
And we will talk about it certainly in the coming few weeks. So this brings us on to our next segment, Saida. Uh,
Yeah.
it's called Where is your GPS pointing? This is a segment where you and I talk about stuff happening in the motorsport community, apart from just regular racing, just a casual conversation about developments and other chatter or banter around various paddocks in the motorsport space. So, Saida,
Right.
where is your GPS pointing at, mate?
Well, before we figure out where my GPS is pointing, I'll tell you where my GPS has been pointing till now. Despite it being the off season for Formula One, we did see racing officially restart for basically the whole motorsport community towards the end of January, the previous month. We saw the Rolex 24, the prestigious 24 hours of Daytona held at the Daytona International Circuit. Definitely an exciting race that happened over there. You know, the tight battle between Acura and Cadillac really brought out the excitement and really showed what a 24-hour race can actually do. Very different to Le Mans, where, you know, you have huge spaces between the leaders more often than not. It was good to see about most of the DPI, the Daytona prototype international vehicles, all finishing on the lead lap. So over the course of 24 hours for all those cars to finish on the same lead lap, just shows how good the competition was, how experienced these drivers were, and most importantly, how closely spaced these cars were in terms of performance. And that's what all fans like to see. Now, obviously, the Daytona 500, the Daytona International Circuit, has been used for quite extensively over the past few weeks. We saw the launch of the NASCAR season as well, the Daytona 500. We got another freak winner from in the likes of Michael McDowell, who finally got his first Sprint Cup victory over there. And then we move on to the Nextel Cup and the Sprint Cup for the Daytona Road Course that happened last week. Again, first time winners, youngsters. I think there's going to be a lot of action and excitement in the NASCAR series this year, both the Sprint and the Nextel Cups, and we'll definitely be following that. All in all, yeah, I'm really excited to say that one of the most prestigious circuits in the racing community has been extensively used over the past month. But now moving on to where my GPS is pointing, I'm really looking forward to the DTM season this year. Some big rules and regulation changes happening in DTM. They're no longer
Interesting.
running the class one touring car spec. They're going to completely rechange it to a GT3 spec, and they'll be running sprint car races. What do you have to say about that? I think that's something we could both agree on. It's going to be really exciting this year.
In a retrospect, when I think about the DTM is one sports car series which I have followed religiously for a really long time.
Mhm.
And only because, like in all motorsport, it produces the sense of uncertainty like none other. This is the kind of racing that has produced the top drivers in sports cars.
Yeah.
Uh, but I think with the way things are moving right now, costs are going out of hand, and you have basically what is now an obsolete V8 engine running in those cars. I think a lot of manufacturers are pulling out of the game because they know this is not sustainable for future development of vehicles or even technology for that matter of fact. But
Right.
all in all, when you look at the way DTM has been functioning as a sport, it has always had a fan base. Well, it is not now a touring car Masters series. It
Mhm.
is a GT3 spec series which has two races in a weekend.
Yep,
But what it also does have right now is the fact that it is more accessible to a lot of teams coming into the sport.
for
You
sure.
don't have to have Mercedes manufacturing another car just for the sport, which is pretty much why the reason why they left DTM in the first place.
Mhm.
You don't have uh, Audi or an Aston Martin or a BMW trying to break their heads to make an RS5 DTM, an M4 DTM, or even the DBS Vantage. So when you look at this right now, we have more people coming into the sport. You have more drivers coming into the sport. You have no teams coming. You have new teams coming into the sport as well because costs are now reduced because teams can run these cars in different championships and bring them to the DPS to the DTM on one weekend as well. And the most interesting part about the DTM is the fact that a lot of these drivers who race in the DTM are not there just because of them being rich. To race in the DTM, you would have to be a top driver. You would have to be called on by the elitist teams of racing. You'd have to be called in by a Mercedes. You'd have to be called in by a BMW, and you'll have to be called in by an Audi to race with the contract. And
Yep.
these these teams have literally shaped drivers who have gone on to become not just brand ambassadors of the sport, but more or less the brand holders of the teams, irrespective wherever they run, whether they run 24-hour endurance races or whether they shift categories and move to various other series of racing. It doesn't matter. Once they have a name in TTM, everybody knows you. And I think this is a problem what we might face in the future, considering the fact that it's going to be so much more accessible to new teams to come in or new drivers to opt into the sport. I hope this does not become something wherein which any pay driver just comes in, because the kinds of talent which has been bred through this series is quite
Yep.
impeccable. And
Yep.
if it still maintains the raw sort of value that it has, I think the DTM is still going to be on a lot of people's mind. But if it just drops in value, because a lot of people just decided they can just come in and race because they have a car and they're free on a weekend,
Mhm.
I think that's going to really affect the way things move on in sports car racing in general. I think that's the same thing what we've seen in the GT Open as well. The GT Open was quite a good racing series, but now half the grid is basically customer racing teams and pay drivers. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but it's nowhere as near as the kind of racing that you will get in a Blancpain or a GT World Cup, which is
Yep.
happening right now.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that. I think GT racing and endurance racing in general has always been considered an elite form of racing, perhaps arguably one of the most robust forms of racing out there. It's not just about managing a precision a precision bullet almost in the form of something like an F1 car for about 55 laps. You are constantly battling a car, an endurance spec car over multiple hours of racing, at least in GT racing. And as you said, DTM is definitely one of the highest forms of touring car racing. I mean, the Deutsche Tourenwagen Masters has always been the top tier of touring car racing. So now for it to shift into GT3 gives a different twist. I would have to agree with you. Let's just hope that the integrity and the level of competition stays right up there. You take things like WEC as well. You've had the same drivers, drivers like Timo Bernhard, Nakajima, Kobayashi, Alonso as well. They keep extremely experienced drivers for multiple years in these cars because these factory teams, these works teams really want the best out of their car. And they're not just going to give it to any driver that's gone up the grid. They need to give it to someone who has experience in long-term experience in the racing field. Anyhow, yeah, that's a little bit about the DTM series and what we can expect. But from a more dramatic point of view, Chaco, where is your GPS pointing at?
So well, Saidat, my GPS is pointing towards Drive to Survive season 3 right now.
Oh yeah.
So, I know Drive to Survive may not be the most broad description of Formula One which they can give to you. It pretty much may not describe the racing what it really is, but I think it gives you a cleaner sense of what really happens behind the scenes. And a lot of the a lot of racing isn't just about what happens on track or even motorsport in general. A lot of it does not have to have a direct impact on what happens on track, but a lot of it happens behind the scenes. The kinds of conversations people have, the kinds of relationships people have with not just teams and officials, but also the fans, brings out a lot more to expect from the real racing circus which we see right now. And Netflix has done quite a good job. I think we have seen a lot of conversations and a lot of memes which have come out from the last few years of Drive to Survive. And but more importantly, it also gives you a sense of the kind of urgency and the intricacy it requires to deal with the sport at that level. It's not like, while you don't know how things might happen in a football or a cricket team, you can possibly have access to it here and there.
Yeah.
But this is something that nobody had access to. And looking at it for the first time,
Hmm.
it obviously brings an awe about how the sport's being run. And
Yeah.
I feel like this sets a very good precedent to people to not just give them a better idea about what the sport does, but also what it does for people. It's not just racing in circles. It's not just winning a championship. There is a lot at risk. And Drive to Survive really puts that into perspective. It shows you that it is not for the faint hearted.
Yeah.
I know it is a little over the top at particular points of time, but they have also grabbed so many good instances from Formula One. They have also grabbed many backstories. They've
Yep.
also brought to light the hardships so many drivers have faced. They've
Yep.
shown the good, the bad, the ugly, and it only makes you want to watch the sport more. And coming on to season three, I'm really looking forward to last year. Nobody knew what could have happened last year.
Yep.
And the way things panned out, oh man, I'm really looking forward to a lot. If I had to name a lot of them, it would probably be episode 1 to episode 10. I want to watch everything.
Yeah.
Everything was exciting.
Yeah, I think the one point that you mentioned about driver backstories, that's something that I personally really enjoyed over the past two seasons. We've seen episodes tailored around the journeys of drivers like Daniel Ricciardo, Esteban Ocon, Carlos Sainz, Charles Leclerc, and even Albon last season, Pierre Gasly. I mean, the things that go on in the sport, not just on track but off track, really puts things into perspective. It's not just about driving around in circles, like you said. It never was. It never is just driving around in circles. You have a lot of stuff to deal with off track as well. You have to be smart off track just as you are on track. It's not just about going for a gap that exists. It's about playing your cards right when you're not in the car. And yeah, in terms of what we got to look out for, one episode. I mean, of course, I'm going to look out for all the episodes, but to be more specific, I'm really interested in the episode that's going to cover the Tuscan GP at Mugello. We saw a horrific
Ah,
multi-car pileup that happened in that. Some could say a flawed safety car restart. We saw that concertina effect. It always causes problems, and here it was that concertina effect that caused mismanagement and mistiming for the brakes of these drivers. I don't think we've ever seen a safety car restart as bad as that in the past few decades. I personally think that's going to be a case study for restarts in the future. Maybe a complete replot of where these safety car lines are going to be drawn on track. What do you think about that episode? Do you think that's going to be something that's really going to get those gears running?
of course, it is definitely going to get the gears running from it. Well, not as much. Well, fun fact about that race before we get into the episode: within 5 minutes of racing, or perhaps 5 minutes of real-time racing, we had two red flags, seven cars out,
Yeah,
and an absolute clutter of everyone on the grid. Nobody knew where they were.
yeah,
Nobody literally had idea of where they were at the given point in time. And another fun fact was that this was Ferrari's 1000th race.
hmm, yeah,
Yeah, and considering what a devastating season Ferrari have had, knowing that they still managed to have two Ferraris finish the race was quite the thing for me. But yeah, for sure, I'm definitely looking forward to see what that episode can bring.
yeah,
We had obviously seen that Formula 3, Formula 2, and Formula One all had crashes in pretty much the same places. It is quite inevitable, to be frank. But I think Formula One was quite over the top when we look at the way things panned out. But I'm also looking forward to a lot of other episodes. I'm really looking forward to the episode where Sergio Perez wins. I want to see I want to see Pierre Gasly, that very emotional win
Yep.
after what was quite a torrid season for him,
Mhm.
and for him at Red Bull,
Yep.
getting his first win in a time like this. That's brilliant. Lando Norris, Esteban Ocon,
Yep.
Alex Albon, all of these podiums put together, man. I just want to see how they all go through. A lot of the changes where this team had to make because of drivers getting COVID. I want to see how things move out from there, how they manage the stuff. And
Yes.
lastly, how can we forget how the hell did Ian Bell and all the FIA and the medical officials ensure that the safety was made on track and see Romain Grosjean walking out of that fiery crash?
Yep.
That's going
That
to be an
was
episode which I'm going to dread, but I just want to see through it because this brings out the best of Formula One.
definitely, I think that's going to be the second case study of the season. You could say the second major case study of that season. Yes,
Perhaps.
a lot of memories sealed out from last year. They're going to be enriched and brought to life in these episodes by Netflix. So a lot of the memories that have been created, but I think a lot of memories are yet to be created this year. Is Schumacher going to carve his own legacy? Is Perez going to match Verstappen's pace? Is Lewis Hamilton going to break his own record and take that eighth world title? And if that does happen, which seems inevitable, by which race is it going to happen? All of this is yet to come. I think we have a lot to discuss in the weeks coming up. We are building up for testing. Testing is going to start on the 12th of March, a couple of weeks from now, and we are looking forward to that. So on that note, I think I'm done. I think we've covered what we need to cover for this week. On that note, any last words for this episode, Chaco?
Uh, Absolutely nothing. Just stay safe, take care, stay lit. Ciao ragazzi.
Yep. Stay safe. Ciao.